just because you have to spend your initial 5 years doing work that nobody liked, it doesn't mean that that's the way to learn, right? So if you're telling me that the only way for me to learn about a business is to download sheets from 5 different places and put them in an Excel and then put them in a PPT and then present to you, I don't think that's the best way to define how you learn.
Hi all, many things to be on Aulium today. So today I'm with my good friend Marcus, and we have the immense pleasure to have you, Sandeep, founder of CalvinBall Technology. Marcus, Sandeep, hi, super cool to be with you today.
Hi, Thomas. Hi, Marcus. Great to be here.
Lovely to meet you, Sandeep, and yeah, great to be here, Thomas.
So maybe to kickstart the discussion, why don't you start telling us a bit more about CalvinBall Technologies, which is essentially like an AI company in the consumer and retail space? That would be absolutely amazing to discover a bit more about the technology you are building and the solutions and the problems you are trying to solve.
Sure. I'm going to take a little while to set the context for this, just accommodate my lengthy answer. I think it's important to sort of take a step back and say, what is our mission at CalvinBall? And our mission at CalvinBall is actually to fuse human expertise into artificial intelligence. And that sort of is the crux of what we do. As part of that mission, KJ is an AI super agent that we built for consumer brands that essentially converts disparate data into decisions in seconds, right? So that is the overarching mission and what we do specifically as a product. And I'm going to tie both of them together because when we look at the basic problem of large enterprise brands around the world, they've been losing share to insurgent brands. They've been losing share to smaller brands for a while now. And if you look at the main reason for that, it is usually boils down to agility or speed. If they have the scale, but they're not able to move fast enough. Consumers are moving faster. These smaller brands are moving much faster. And then you ask, okay, then what is causing the lack of speed? I mean, it's always been there. What's accelerating this lack of agility? And what's accelerating is the dramatic increase in complexity, exponential increase in complexity, because there are far many more media channels. There are far many more distribution channels. They're just exponentially higher. So every time, just to give an example, every time there's a new distribution channel, the number of data points that can increase is in the order of millions because it's a multiplicative factor, right? And now, if you have a new influencer marketing channel, if you have a new media channel, that's another factor of X. So what's happening is you have this exponentially increasing data that's causing this complexity, but you process that data and convert that to decisions the old way, which is manually. But why is there's so much of data being piled up, but that conversion is still stuck as a bottleneck, is because this conversion from data to decisions requires human expertise, right? And that is what takes the large amount of time. And that is what we intend to bring human expertise into artificial intelligence to build products that also have the ability to have the judgment and the expertise to convert the data to decisions. So that's in a nutshell what we do. And I'm sure in the course of this interview, I'll explain a lot more, but that's essentially the basis of our startup.
A great starting point. I mean, thank you for that. Maybe going back in the past. So you started your career at Unilever in India, absolutely huge market. I mean, I think when we are based in Europe, I mean, we can't even really comprehend what that means in terms of market size. And what did you learn there about maybe building brands, pushing brands at scales, etc. And what sort of lessons you learn that essentially shaped a bit the earliest concepts of CalvinBall technology?
Yeah, if you're a VC who's planning to invest in India, this is important for you to know because I feel like just give you a context of Unilever in India, one of the oldest companies that set up shop in India, greater than $10 billion, the second largest Unilever company for Unilever around the world. Absolute institution in terms of the way that they approach marketing. India, 1.5 billion people, India has, if you were to round off a billion in India, that 400 million it would be the third largest country in the world. So that's the scale. And I think a lot of people don't realize that
Mm.
the difference in scale, right? And so then 29 different official languages, dialects, so many different states. If you were to look at it from marketing standpoint, to be able to serve 700 million consumers around the country across every single consumer segment would be like a logistical nightmare, logistical consumer marketing nightmare, so to speak, right? But growing up, my first job being there, I was exposed to this very, very early on. So one of the things that we would learn very early on is to not depend on your anecdotal experience of lived experience of what you see as sort of your consumer truth, because it is almost literally impossible for a human being to experience a billion people, or no matter what sample you take, and get a subjective valuation of that. Now, I mean, you could say that about 60 million in France as well, but it's easier for someone in France to say, I think maybe in 30 years of meeting different consumers in France, I kind of am an expert on France. So maybe I can talk about it. And France is still a big country, but there's no way you can do that in India, and you shouldn't do that in India. Let me give you some examples. That I worked in some very interesting categories. I worked in household care. I worked in with diaper brands, etc. So if you speak to anyone from India, they'd say, in India everybody has household help. So it doesn't really matter who you're marketing to, because they go and buy the household dishes, and therefore it doesn't really matter what ads you make. You need to make it for them. The truth is, at least this is about 10 years back, so the data is a little dated, but the penetration of household care, or the penetration data, showed that not more than 10% of the households had household help. Everybody else did the work themselves, but 10% is still 150 million. So for a person who's growing up in a city, they may not have seen beyond the 150 million, not even beyond 10 million. A lot of people feel like all their friends have iPhones. That's just 4% of the country. So very early on, I learned to trust the data and take decisions on that data. The reason I'm saying that in a VC context is the first wave of VCs that came here said a billion people. They did all their time calculations. Sort of, it came, it completely did not work out. And now we have a better understanding. The VCs themselves are saying there's India 1, India 2, India 3. They've done the segmentation themselves, but we've been doing it for ages in CPG. So I feel like the VCs could have learned a thing or two from speaking to these marketers who work in Unilever and P&G.
Yeah, for sure. A quick follow-on question for me. So after Unilever, you moved to Google, right? So very different companies, also both very big, but different spaces. So when you were helping roll out products like YouTube and the products that you were rolling out there, what did you learn about the reality of adoption, and like how does it, I guess, color your view on how fast AI will spread in big companies?
Yeah, this is my favorite topic, because every time someone says that we are going to be in AGI in 3 years, and then everybody is going to be automated with AI, I say, just take a deep breath. Let's remember
Calm
that,
down.
yeah, because especially because I worked at Google. So let's take two industries, right? Digital advertising and the cloud market. Digital advertising, or let's say Google AdWords, sort of started in 2005. You could give it 20 years. So 20 years of the companies with $2 trillion of market cap in Facebook and Google, or even more actually, who have invested every single penny to build products that make it as easy as possible to adopt digital marketing, is still at a stage where there is an ecosystem of, I don't know, maybe 50 to $100 billion of people just implementing this, right? So it's been Google's dream for someone to spend on AdWords as easy it is to sort of, or even Meta's dream for people to spend on Meta as easy it is to handle or shoot a video, right? It's been their dream. It's what they've been working for, and you still have an agency ecosystem that is 50 to $100 billion or even more, that is helping enterprises do digital marketing. That is the data we have on our side. These are some of the best companies in the world. You see the same thing with cloud adoption. I don't know where we are at public cloud adoption. I think we're probably not at digital marketing itself is probably globally about 60% now. It's still not 80, 90%. But public cloud is also like 30, 40%. They're still fast growing. That's also AWS came on in 2007. So that's also a 15 to 20-year journey. We're still a long way off from enterprise adoption. To cut a long story short, enterprise adoption takes time for anything, no matter how easy it seems and how powerful and impactful the effects are. It takes time because there's a lot of unlearning to do. There's a lot of people in the mix who will obviously not move on as fast as they could. So my sense is that it's going to take a long time, and long time could be anyone's definition of probably 15, 20 years before the last enterprise company gets on and is fully AI enabled, right? It's gonna take a while. It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay, and
Yeah, that
just
makes
like
sense.
regarding this, I mean, do you think maybe, I mean, those companies not moving fast enough will essentially disappear quicker than the 15 years mark you just mentioned?
I so it's very hard to predict the future.
It's very impossible.
Will AI adoption be faster than cloud and digital marketing adoption? Probably, but you're still looking at a 20-year horizon, right? You're still
Mm.
what is fast? What is fast defined as? You're still looking at, I think the fastest you can get to the space where the most, the most digitally non-savvy or not savvy enterprise would get on and have some sort of AI adoption where they're using AI for analytics or customer service or whatever else they're using it for. I think it'll still take about 10 to 15 years. Best case scenario.
Okay. And so coming back to the sort of genesis of CalvinBall Technologies and KJ, I mean, was there like a single moment where you said, okay, we need to build that solution straight away? Or was it when you were still at Google? Or did you have maybe to meet like some people, like discuss some sort of concepts and then come up with the actual concept you have today and the product you have today? I mean, was there like a specific moment, a
No, I,
eureka moment?
I don't know if there's a single eureka moment, but I think a combination of maybe at least a couple that I can mention. One was when I myself was the ICP. In this case, I was a brand manager at Unilever. So I remember not only that, but at Google, I was still working with CPG companies and consumer brands as clients. So sort of I've been in touch with what's the pain point on their end. My pain specifically was as a brand manager was that the amount of time that was wasted in just getting all of the data together at one place in itself was a big pain point for me. The fact that it took, if I were to split my time into gathering evidence, identifying problem, and taking action, if I were to split that taking action was like 10%. And I kept I would have loved to go back in time and move that 10% to 90%, where gathering the evidence and deciding on an action plan or identifying the problem would happen, could happen in 10%, and taking action would take 90%. That is the intention here that we have. That can we, because none of this makes people feel good, because this is repetitive work and it feels like it's not intellectually stimulating enough for you to do it again and again. So nobody is happy about doing it, even though there are people doing it as their only job. Nobody's happy about downloading 15 different Excel sheets, getting it into a place, figuring out what the problem is, identifying the problem, all of those things. They just want to say, okay, let's take a decision and move quickly. The other, from a technology side, was when I was at Google, is when I saw kind of Google fumble the initial AI wave. So they sort of invented the transformers and then sort of went quiet about it. And then ChatGPT came along. So I saw how Google sort of was completely shocked by the fact that OpenAI came along. And to be honest, even though Google had the technology, they didn't have the courage to come out and disrupt their own business with it initially. But I do know that one of the biggest problems that we saw at Google Cloud and in general, customers were frustrated about Google was the fact that while they were great at making products that they could then scale it up across everyone else, they were never good at customization and last mile. It was never Google's forte. So I think my thought was that if we could make the last mile adoption smooth for companies and also quote unquote be as product productize that process as much as possible, you could build a big business there, because this is messy, this is difficult, this is hard work. This is typically not something that companies like Google and Amazon or Microsoft want to solve. They want to build, they build to make standardized products that have $1 billion TAMs at the very minimum, and then just let the ecosystem build it up. Right? They're not here to solve specific problems for each individual customer. They were not very good at it, at least. So I thought that there was a opportunity there. So this combination of the fact that I know the pain myself and I know what the gaps were in the market, that's where we decided to
So,
start.
so it was more something like, step by step process in some way, more than a
Yeah,
eureka moment where you woke up one day, took your shower, and say, we need to do that.
I really want to know if anyone has those kind of moments anymore.
I read you're considering relocating your headquarters to London. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I guess you're going to be investing, well, it's going to be a big weather shift. You're going to be investing heavily on umbrellas, I guess, as well. What are you thinking London unlocks specifically for the business, talent, enterprise access, proximity to regulators? What is it that you think specifically London is attractive for?
See, I think the consumer sectors that we've chosen to go specialize in vertical AI for are pretty big in Europe specifically. So I think it's proximity to clients. Some of our clients are in the UK, and their global headquarters are in the UK, and we need to be close to them rather than some of the countries, right? So that's a major consideration. Given that our CTO is based there, our CFO is based there, we also feel like it's easier to run a global business from London because of the time zone benefits. I live in New York. My tech team's in Asia, and often the folks in London are the bridge. If I want them to come on a call with a client, they are available. It's easy to do that, and we have clients across the world, and it's easier to manage that from London. And I've also found that London is about almost 40 to 50% cheaper from a cost per employee compared to the United States, for example. But
Oh,
you get,
interesting.
yeah, 40% at least. But you get good English speaking talent, and people who can even work in terms of go to market for the US market, etc. You could do that from London. So I feel it's like a underrated spot in that manner.
Interesting. So you feel your experience has been that talent in New York is better paid on average than in the UK. Interesting.
Okay. And so, so you just mentioned, so you lead like a super international team. How do you do to essentially manage like cohesion? So you said you are yourself a lot. You are based mostly in New York, London, Southeast Asia. You had told me you run some sort of super hackathon in Bali. How do you manage cohesion, and how do you manage your speed of execution, etc., with such a spread out team?
Yeah. But I'll be the first one to say that the most ideal thing in the world would be for everyone to be in one place, right? But we have to also realize that we are running also global delivery teams, just not product teams. So our product teams are mostly in a single place, but we have delivery teams across the world who we work with, and then we have different individuals who are based, different sales teams that are based in different parts of the world as well. So the way that we've tried to get the best of both worlds is that, and we've worked out the costs on this as well, is that we do have a campus in Bali. And a lot of people smile saying, what sort of campus is in Bali? But Bali is actually a tech, pretty good. Since the pandemic, it's become a good tech spot as well. So it's got, it's a great place to have a campus. So we do have that. And it's obviously very much more cost effective. So 10 days in a month, or maybe 10 days or 15 days in 2 months, we do gather there, everyone, to thrash out everything that we need to do to build together. And because we know that the time together is limited, we are very intentional in what we do. And therefore, every day is planned out. We have outputs that come out every day. So about 1/3 of our time is actually spent in a deliberate uh, in a deliberate calendar, so to speak, where we are expected to deliver outputs like a hackathon. Uh, and we have nothing else to do because it's like the back of beyond in Bali. There's nothing else there. We are all together in a single place, and it's limited time, so people don't get sort of burnt out. They can go back as well. So that currently is the is the system there. And I don't think that's going to change too much because it'd always be a team that has both product and GTM working together. So if it's a pure product team, yeah, they're all going to be together and they'll work together. But there's always going to be delivery and GTM teams that are going to come up and ideate and then go back to their places where the customers are. So we feel like this is a good sort of, a good, happy middle.
Okay, got it. And so in terms of solutions you provide, like how does it fit, like, let's say, in the general market trends in the retail space? So many brands in the industry, I mean, would say and observe that it has flipped from a supply-led to a demand-led sort of situation. And where does that complexity bite really the hardest right now? I mean, is it in terms of pricing, promotion, etc.? I mean, in the way, I mean, you gather data, etc. I mean, you may see like the most generic pain points for those brands. I mean, do you have
Yeah,
any sort of information on that, or?
I think it's a big spectrum, like different companies on different stages in their evolution of how they look at data. But complexity, like I told you, the basic insight is the fact that large companies have seen a dramatic increase in complexity because consumers have gotten complex in the way they consume both the product and media, which is the two things that consumer brands care about. Where do they buy my product and where do they see my product or learn about my product, right? Both these have dramatically multiplied in the NFL and assume that everybody would have seen you. People are fragmenting significantly. It's getting obviously harder and harder to reach people through traditional advertising, etc. So there's a lot of complexity in how do you reach consumers to just give them a message. And then more importantly, how do they access and discover your brand? All of those things have gotten far more complex than earlier. And therefore, the number of data points you need to look at to be able to even identify trends, for example, that has gotten much more complex. Now, the ability to sort of maybe spot trends, etc., is easy if you're only dealing with external data, but it is not easy if you're dealing with also with internal data and the amount of complexity that is there in internal data. It's not as simple as trend spotting with an external data. So I think these are the places where the complexity has dramatically increased for sure.
Yeah, very, very interesting point, actually. Just drilling a little bit more into the data point that you mentioned. So you aggregate a lot of data across markets and channels. What have you discovered about consumer goods trends and challenges that you'd say genuinely surprises you? And what's things that have confirmed what you already believed before?
That is an interesting question. We do aggregate some amount of data externally. Most of the time, we work with internal data, and obviously, what's internal data is private and is proprietary data of the company. We do aggregate some level of external data, but I don't think we have access to too much. If I were to put my thoughts on what has surprised me and what's confirmed from experience from my experience earlier as a brand manager, I would say that the thing that most surprises me is how influencers continue to impact. I mean, it's totally different from earlier when you would be able to track. So today, for example, if you're running a TikTok campaign and if you're in Indonesia, there's 5,000 line items in that because there are 5,000 influencers running a single campaign. How the hell? So how would you even know what impact it has? How would you be able to track it? Because these are all just, you can just track the comments, you can track something, but it's not as simple as doing a panel and doing a before and after like TV used to be. So we still haven't solved this. Like, how do you run an influencer campaign just like you would do any other channel? Is still an unsolved problem. Um, I know we're doing our best to try and solve for it from a data standpoint, but still an unsolved problem. So that still surprises me. I think the other piece that has changed a lot, and I would say significantly, is that people are discovering that what is most valuable is what people buy as a signal of who they are. So digital marketing has been able to give you so many different signals, which I would say are noise in the sense that what they like, what they engage with, what they click on, what they view, all of those things pale in comparison to what they buy.
Mm-hmm.
So you've seen a dramatic increase, which is basically putting your money where your mouth is. We've seen a dramatic increase in the significance of retail media data in deciding what major CPG companies do in terms of strategy. So I think that would be the other big thing that's changed in the last 5-6 years.
Okay. And so you're running like an AI company, so there are quite a lot of concerns around AI in general. So for you, I guess your solution that in part would generate reports on, performance of different products, different brands within a portfolio in a matter of minutes instead of a matter of weeks. I guess like those reports were historically, but even now, I guess, managed and created by, let's say, more junior personnel within those companies. And do you see essentially a slowdown of, hiring when you deploy with one client? Like, do they feel that they need to maybe fire some people, or do they need to slow down recruitment? I mean, do you see that maybe your product is essentially replacing human beings?
I don't think in the immediate. So, for example, if someone were to use one of our playbooks or products, it's not directly to, to sack a few people, not at least one on one. So what happens is that when they make a case, some part of the case is made for efficiency and productivity. So when you make a business case saying, this is the amount I'm paying for it, and therefore I'm going to retrieve it from productivity gains. And that productivity gains is measured by human hours. So you make a theoretical um, sort of business case on human hours, and then eventually you redeploy the people that you have in other stuff. So it's not like literally saying you're going to be sacked and this machine is coming or AI is coming. It's really, look, I've saved X amount of human hours from by productivity gains using this, so now I can now redeploy my existing humans. So it's probably going to stop. I mean, if you're a company that is using AI, you're probably going to stop hiring at that rate for sure. But I haven't seen anyone mass firing people by adopting AI, because you still need
Mm.
people, like I said, humans in the loop for human expertise, as well as people, and there's enough and more opportunity to redeploy them in other stuff as well. And
Yeah.
remember this, like most of the stuff the AI is doing now, people didn't want to do in any case. Like it's not like it's currently taking away. So let's say if you go to an analyst and if you give him one of our playbooks, where it sort of completely automates the process of getting the data together and giving all that he or she wants, now they can focus on the edge cases that they never had time to focus on. So then they can figure out some new opportunities that they never had time to focus on. So right now, AI is only removing most of the repetitive work that they sort of never felt like they were needed to in any case. So I haven't seen that happening right now, but I'm sure eventually the productivity gains have to be reflected for the CFO in a better balance sheet. Otherwise, it's all going.
Yeah.
So you started working like at Unilever. You said you were building those reports, etc. And I'm sure you may say I learned a lot by actually building those reports.
I've heard that.
Okay, and so now, like, if the younger generations, I mean the junior within Unilever, if they don't have to do this anymore, I mean, do you think they will learn as fast or as well as you used to?
This is a
No
really
pain, no
funny
gain.
It's a really funny argument I've heard from many, many people, including senior folks, saying, hey, how are the junior folks going to learn about the business if they don't crunch Excel sheets? And I find that to be a funny argument, because just because you have to spend your initial 5 years doing work that nobody liked, it doesn't mean that that's the way to learn, right? So if you're telling me that the only way for me to learn about a business is to download sheets from 5 different places and put them in an Excel and then put them in a PPT and then present to you, I don't think that's the best way to define how you learn. So
No,
I
but
would
I mean,
say
I
that
mean, for this, at least you would see the entire value chain. So from the source, you gather the
no, I
data,
understand
then
what
you
you're saying.
refactor.
I understand what you're saying. I think the point I'll make to you as well as to everyone else is that the learning that was happening by doing repetitive work was a byproduct. It was like it had to be done. Somebody was doing it, and in the process, they were learning it, right? Now that something else is there to do it, maybe there's a faster, better way for you to learn something. Maybe you spend more time meeting consumers. Maybe you spend more time meeting customers. Maybe you spend more time doing the stuff that you didn't have time to do because you were too busy doing this. I don't think anyone can make the case that we were actually intending to design a process that people do all of these things to learn. No, the learning was a byproduct. And I'm sure if you redesign your org in a way that you can now make a deliberate attempt to say, this is how you learn, it's much easier for you to learn this way, you'll figure it out. But I would not buy the argument that this is the best way to learn.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've all been through that phase. We've got the cuts to prove it. But at the same time, I'm inclined to agree with you. It's very AI helps with a lot of the menial tasks, and it's just so great. I'm actually very tempted to use it too much these days, and you need to turn back on your critical thinking. Turning around.
My
Oh,
dad-in-law
sorry.
is a banker. He's been a banker
Yeah.
all his life, and obviously he's pretty old, and therefore he always asks me, what do you mean you guys can work from anywhere you want? Where do you do the actual work? Because in his mind, the actual work is in writing the accounts and tallying it, right? Where does the
Yeah.
actual work happen? It's very difficult for him to imagine that actual work happens remote. So I feel like some of that sentiment is coming through here as well.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Actual work, you really need it needs to be painful. Question around some of the more negative sides of AI or problems that are still due to be addressed. How do you address AI hallucinations, for example? How do you manage that within business applications?
I think that's one of our main pain points or rather one of the main reasons that we are adopted a lot in enterprise. And one of the main reasons that enterprise AI hasn't been adopted so fast is because the concept of generative AI, by nature of it being generative, was that it wasn't built for accuracy. It was built for expansive hypothesis generation and ideation, and so that's the stuff that it works best for. That's not the stuff that enterprises are happy with. They need you can't work with some 95% or 96% accuracy when you're looking at real data and real numbers. It is essentially the reason that we exist, and the reason that ChatGPT cannot do what we do is the fact that we have a process in place where we are able to sanitize the data in the backend, make the connections between the workflows and the pipelines, and make sure that you are, and we have an expertise there, which we'll talk about later, is triggering the LLMs only when it's needed to. And sometimes when it's pure automation, you're using just automation. So you don't need an LLM to tell you 2 plus 2 is 4. It was never needed. You needed an LLM to explain it to you in English. And I'm saying 2 plus 2 as a really, the most simple example. But imagine like, 100
And now
Excel
I need
sheets of.
ChatGPT. I need ChatGPT to do 2 plus 2 for me.
Yeah.
So it's very important when you design for that particular industry, saying that, okay, how much of this question requires a quantitative objective answer, and how much of this requires a generative answer that might be happen that may not be 100% prob- that is probabilistic in nature, and that's not deterministic in nature. So this is the big problem, right? And what we've tried to do, or what we've done, is actually build a product which can, looking at the context of the question, understand where to trigger the LLM and get the probabilistic answer from, and where to use, the expert layer and the automation that we have to just give back the answer in a way that they want to. That is why you need a product that is not just ChatGPT. That is why you need an enterprise AI product that can do this for you. So that is how we prevent hallucination from happening, and that is literally why enterprises are confident using us. And that is one of the reasons why Copilot adoption has been so low, because they've not solved the problem of hallucination, because their idea was to just dump an LLM on data. That doesn't work. You can't just dump an LLM on data and expect it to give right answers. It can give probabilistic answers, but it can't give you accurate answers. So you need to do more than just that.
Okay, makes sense. Regarding regulation, so I mean, you have like new regulation and new rules blending in Europe, for example, this year. I mean, what did you observe within your clients and the brands you talk to, like in terms of their sort of requirement and what you would need to do like differently, maybe around like model transparency, where you store the data, etc. I mean, have you seen specific requirements from your clients? And I mean, how fast do you think you will need to adapt, or if you haven't adapted yet?
Yeah, I think there are 3 or 4 parts to this question, right? So the first thing that I want to clarify for sure is that everybody wants to make sure the data is private and secure. And that is of paramount importance. This is even without any governmental or any regulatory supervision. Every company or every organization will not work with anyone if the data is not private and secure. So we don't even take the data out of their premises. The data doesn't leave their cloud or their premises. So that's the first thing, that we make sure that the data is completely private and secure. We are sort of ISO SOC 2 certified for that reason. But the other part of the question is that many of the companies that we work with also have an AI assurance council or some version of that, which is to make sure that you're using AI responsibly. So that comes into place in 2 or 3 places, in 2 or 3 different facets of the enterprise world. One is that if it's an application or a use case which using AI to interact with consumers, that has a higher degree of supervision or a higher degree of a higher filter for figuring out if this AI is safe or not, because then you're responsible as a company for that. So we don't sort of build that many use cases that works directly with consumers. And in the cases where we do, it goes through rigorous testing far more than internal data. In the case of internal data, I think companies are definitely looking at ways in which agents are not completely autonomous, and any decisions that are taken need to be held, somebody has to be held accountable for that. You don't want to be in a situation where you say, I don't know, the agent did it, right? You can't be in that mode. So they're happy to be using it for data, decisions, and insights. But when it comes to actions, there are far more higher guardrails. So a simple example is, for example, if you want to automate your entire digital marketing. So you can connect our AI to Google APIs or Facebook APIs, and it'll tell you exactly what's going wrong with your campaign. It'll suggest what you should do. And if they want to, they can take the action right there. But taking the action right there means that there's a budget involved, and there's somebody who has to be held accountable for that. So if you build an agent that takes an action automatically, there are some questions and doubts on how in the future that is sustainable. So I think companies are like, okay, let's make sure that there are decision points which are to be taken by a human, because these involve financial decisions, strategic decisions. That point has to still be somebody has to be accountable for that, and we have to have observability on that. But the other stuff can be done by agents.
We don't
So I
want
think
to.
this.
We don't want to fire the AI. We want to fire the human being if there is a problem.
Yes. Who can I fire for this mistake?
There's a live debate at the moment happening with specialists in the industry where we're talking about the industry led, sort of industry tuned specialist AI versus generalist LLMs. So, where do you think specialization's clearly a better win for consumer brands, and where is a large general model? Where does that still earn its keep?
Yeah. So it's a good question on generics versus vertical. So there are still a lot of things that can be done by generic AI. So, for example, there's nothing stopping you from brainstorming with an AI on some idea. For example, there is nothing stopping you from working with generic AI for using external data. There's nothing stopping you from asking it, what will happen if I do this, etc. That kind of stuff, right? But the moment it comes to where you need 100% deterministic answers, then generic AIs don't work. You need a constrained, a vertical specialist AI that doesn't hallucinate. The other point is that if you want to build something where you want to solve the problem like you would, then you need to train it to be able to solve it like you would. So obviously that the generalist doesn't work in that case. Other use cases like getting to the root cause of a problem, it requires a lot of context, and so it's very hard to be able to use a generalist without training it in with enough context so that it can get to the root cause of what the problem is. Industry jargon, company jargon, kind of it doesn't get. So obviously disconnected data sets, it doesn't work. So the reason that enterprise AI hasn't taken off is because the generics don't solve all these problems. If you ask someone how much is their AI usage at work and at home, it's the opposite of what you would think. You would think that people would use AI more at work and less at home, but they actually use AI more at home and less at work, because the AIs that that are built for consumer use cases are built with all the context. They have all the context that they need about you, so they can give you great answers. And obviously, you're not going to. Nothing depends on it. Like it's not a major business financial decision doesn't depend on it. But enterprise requires the data to be in one place. The different context required to solve for that problem for that industry requires it to understand the jargon that is unique to that particular company. So it's a totally it's like completely different in terms of. I think enterprise AI is probably about 3 or 4 years behind consumer AI in terms of sophistication and the use cases and the ease of usage. And
So,
and the reason for that is the generalist versus specialist. If generalists were enough, then they would be equal. So the evidence is that what is the difference between usage of AI at home and at workplace? That difference is completely because generalists don't work for the workplace.
Okay, got it. Maybe relinking to one of your first points in terms of speed of adoption, etc. So one of your promises to your prospects and your future clients is no capex, but you get results in weeks. What does onboarding look like? Because I'm sure you need to connect to a lot of systems, etc. So, from my point of view, I mean, I've never been in that business, but it sounds like enormous work and pain to just release something, even though it works like super well and it generates like insights, etc., super quickly once it's implemented. The implementation side of things, I mean, to someone like me, feels absolutely ultra heavy. What does it look like? Maybe once you sign a client and you say, okay, we deploy. How long does it take? What do you essentially need from that client?
Here I can talk about our evolution because we've spent a year and a half. We came out of stealth in June this year, right? So we spent a year and a half going through an evolution process of how we would do this. So in the beginning, we would just land up at a client, thank God to them, and say, "What are your problems? Tell us your problems, and this is our AI, and we'll figure out a way to solve this for you." That was the initial pitch that we were, and obviously, people couldn't articulate their problems, or they didn't have the time to articulate their problems, right? So it's like, you know, this is a great product, but when it came to use case, they were like, I don't know what use cases could be used for. But we did find people who did articulate those use cases, and that's why we've spent about a couple of years building that expertise layer to be able to have all the industry data and information required to solve those problems. So today, that evolution has got us to a place where we have defined very clearly which business functions we are building a playbook for. So even though we are custom built, we've done a huge amount of work in quote unquote productizing it. So today, as a company, you can see the demo, for example, and you can say, okay, great, I've seen the demo. Choose the business function that you want this to be for, and you can choose it from a drop down of 8 or 9 that we've sort of built it already for. And when they choose the business function, it automatically populates at the back end all the different metrics that are important for that business function, all the data sources it prompts all the data sources that are required to give you insights on those particular metrics and actions to be taken on those metrics. So all they need to do is say, okay, do I have this data source? Where is it? Where is this data source, etc. And then they can choose from a variety of output formats. So they can choose either to get a Q&A format. They can choose then if they want to get an early warning signal, they can choose a root cause analysis. We've got a bunch of them that we've spoken to clients for and what they really want, what they would really like in terms of decision making. And they can choose that. So now we've productized it to the extent that in the 28 days, for example, that we work with you, we are only working on making sure that the data is in a good place. And this is literally, I mean, I'm hoping that we build agentic systems that take care of this in the future as well. But currently, the problem is that we can work with unstructured data, but we can't work with inaccurate data. And people have inaccurate data. Their nomenclatures are different. Their databases sometimes have brands have differently in different places. So there are lots of bad habits that have crept in that makes the data unusable for any AI. And that 28 days is essentially a way in which we've perfected the art of saying things that cannot be done by AI, that can only be done manually today, how can we do it the fastest? And I think we've gotten to a place where we can do it really fast because we've done it for so many clients. So we know exactly You've chosen the metrics. You've chosen the business function. So we know the metrics. We know the input data sources required for that. We know how they're connected to each other. So our AI is already throwing up, this is inconsistent, this is inconsistent. Please correct these. And then we sit with them, with their team, to make a glossary of all of these things. The things that cannot be done by AI are what can have to be done by 28 days. But it's also important because if this barrier wasn't there, we probably wouldn't exist. It would be very easy to adopt something very centrally, right? A large big tech company could easily do that. But because this barrier exists, and we've sort of built an expertise to make sure, both from a product side and from a process side, that this is done in 28 days, we can deliver something in a month's time that an Accenture or a Deloitte would take 9 months at the very minimum. And you should remember that we don't charge on a service model, we charge on a product basis. So we do not charge on billable hours, which is a big disruption to any of these businesses that do custom building, because all customizations are charged on billable hours. And that means that they have a vested interest to drag it along, which is why you have these 9 months.
That's because you provide a product and not human beings to solve problems.
Yes, we do have human beings. It's a combination, but we don't charge. I mean, it's inclusive. So the subscription cost comes inclusive of both the human beings and the product, but we don't have a vested interest to prolong the projects. We have a vested interest in completing it fast because we are on a subscription model.
Interesting. So you talk about an expertise layer. What does that actually mean in practice? How do you capture how a company really works and turn that into clear playbooks, for example, guard against any made up answers or, I don't know, mismatched data, for example?
Yeah, I think this is probably the most important question in this in this place, right? So let me explain this with a couple of examples. So let's say the most important question that you want answered is that, why did sales drop for my brand last month? And this is credit to the human mind, the fact that such a complex thing that we've internalized, it seems simple for someone from the outside. So let's say we're talking about a CPG brand, and you ask a question, why did sales drop? So let's put the quantitative lens to it, and let's put the subjective lens to it. The quantitative lens says that, do a drill down, figure out, you might want to split your brand into different regions or provinces or different SKUs. So figure out mathematically which is the largest contributor to the loss in terms of the province and the SKU. So there you go there. Then you figure out what are the different input metrics that are potentially could impact the loss in sales, and you look for patterns in those input metrics that have changed. And then a mathematical model would say, okay, I've looked at media and I've looked at distribution and looked at pricing, looked at all of those things. One element has changed, and therefore I feel that the drop in sales has come because you've either not done a promo well or you've not done distribution well, whatever that is. And that seems like a simple mathematical model to do, but we know reality is not that way. And that's why you need an expertise layer. Because what you also need to understand is that if there are 5 or 6 input variables that are potentially causing an impact to the sales, what kind of deviation in that input variable is considered to be standard and non-standard? So you need to know that. Your distribution goes up by 5% last month, and that's why, or went down, and that's why you lost. Maybe distribution goes up and down 5% every month. So it's within the margin of error. So you need to know that. That's subjective. You also need to know whether the sales loss happened as an aberration last month or has been happening for, is it a trend that's been happening? So is it a slope? So you also need to know the slope of what's happening, because depending on the slope, you should know that different input elements impact short term and different input elements impact long term. So a fill rate issue or a supply issue can affect 1 month, but it cannot be a perennial problem. Or if your brand has been losing market share or sales over a period of 3 or 4 months, then you know for a fact that it's not because of something that happened last month. It's something that's happened before. All of these are subjective elements. So this seems simple to a trained mind, but a mathematical model is pretty complex to do, right? And that's why you need an AI with an expertise layer, which now you can input and say, as you keep working on it, you can keep giving this all this context and it learns. Pre-AI mathematical model would never learn. It would say, give me the weights and give me the thing and I will do it. And then it'll do the same thing for everything else. But in an expertise layer, it can understand this context and say, okay, I'll keep this in mind for the next time. Then you can keep improving it. And then slowly it starts working just like a human does. So that's a big difference between using just a regular LLM without an expertise layer. And of course, without an expertise layer, you could do this model training over a period of time, but it's too long and it's too expensive. And it's not something that a CPG company or a retail company can do. It's a specialist job to be done. So if you have to build a model for yourself, that's a big job for you to train that model again and again. What we've made it easy to do is made the UI, the front end, and the method to train it so simple that somebody with the expertise can actually do it. Because if you look at it, the person with the most amount of business expertise is probably the least tech savvy. So if you ask them to go and build a model, they're not going to be able to do it. So if you want your best business guys to be able to transfer their expertise and knowledge into a product in your company, it needs to be super user friendly. And that's what we did.
And
So
regarding
it's essentially the equivalent of, sorry. Yeah, it's essentially the equivalent of, I guess you have a spreadsheet and you have a human looking at the spreadsheet and understanding the assumptions that are going into the forecast. And now you have a layer in between where the human can essentially interact with that. And there's already a layer in between that is already ensuring that there's a certain level of due diligence done there on top of the mathematical model.
Yeah, because there are always exceptions to the rule. There's always some additional stuff that you need to mention. There's always like, last February was like a strike and then there was no sale. So please ignore that February. And how will the system know that if it's an exception? So that kind of stuff.
And regarding training of the model, so you said like data is proprietary. So one client works, like all clients works in silo. How do you get your model even better? I mean, is there a way not to share data, but to essentially make the model better? The more clients you get, the better the model will be, or does it work like this?
So there are elements of the way that, so no data is ever transferred back to us. So individual data is not transferred back to us. And anything that's proprietary in terms of even a way that you solve a problem for your company is definitely proprietary to you. So the model is not learning from that. But the model is always learning on solving basic problems and learning about the industry that can be utilized for the next person. Or the playbooks that we build, for example, in terms of the workflows that we do for those playbooks, the way that we build the UI for the playbooks, there's a tremendous amount of learning to be done because a lot of the large consumer enterprises are built very similarly. So, for example, we've built 8 playbooks, business functions. It's easy to do in this because most of the large companies in the world, which are 200, 300-year-old companies, are built in the same way. So we've got e-commerce, we've got business intelligence, we've got consumer insights. They all have these functions. They all operate the same way. So it's a pretty repeatable model from a playbook, a metric perspective, all of those elements, and it obviously keeps getting better. But we make sure that there is nothing proprietary about a company that is then used outside.
Yeah, it's transferred. Okay. And so I think, you provided part of the answer, like in one of your most recent LinkedIn posts. I mean, you mentioned a comparison between what KJ does for retailers and the canary in a coal mine, which we used to use to essentially spot like gas leak. So are there like specific things you very often spot regularly, and is there some form of a pattern across clients?
So I know for a fact, so we are just starting to work on, so this is everyone's favorite ask, right? I want to feed in all my data and I want it to observe all the anomalies and tell me if there's something I'm missing out on. That's too broad a brief for it to be able to give you an accurate answer. So, I'm sure we can get to it eventually. If we build something specifically to detect anomalies, yes, we can do that. But typically it doesn't work that way. The way that it works is that we built a module called early warning signals. So we know that the only purpose of this module is to tell you something that is going to happen in the future right now. And the way that we do that is that we take the last 6 months, the last 12 months, the last 24 months history, and we keep using these models to project the future. So you get a future prediction. And then the future prediction tells you this is where it's likely to go. And based on all the modeling that we've done, we are saying this because we've noticed that a leading indicator is turning red right now. Now, you may or may not think that leading indicator is even connected to the output. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. But we are telling you that the leading indicator is red and that is likely to impact it. It's very similar to I don't know which sports you guys watch, but in some sports, I watch cricket, but they say that in most of the sports, they say, now you have an 82% chance of winning because every time this happens, this has happened before. This is in the past. So every time this striker has scored in a football analogy, every time this striker has scored a goal, this happened so far. Now, all of this obviously depends on how robust the modeling is and how much data is there previously. But then predictive analysis is always going to be probabilistic, and people should know that, and they can't take that on as the same level as objective metrics.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, there's always there's a lot of sports on in the UK, isn't there? So there's always something to watch. Looking across the wider landscape, from decisions platforms to sort of digital shelf retailing media tools or planning suites, like where would you say that you most often plug in, and what do you replace, I guess, in that situation, and what would you say is your unfair advantage there?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, right? So in our positioning as well, I think we kind of knew in this space, and maybe 5 years later, it'll be easier to define who we are because we just trying to figure out what category we fall under. But we can tell you where we don't fall under, right? The one thing is that our sort of biggest positioning is that we work on your internal data as your AI. So, for example, if there be many ad tech companies or many AI companies in the media space who say that, hey, connect to the API, connect to Google, and then we'll tell you what's happening. So in that case, they don't even have to access the internal data. There's no dirty work to be done. It's simple. It's a API connection. Or connect to a scraping database of e-commerce, and I'll give you that information. So a lot of the SaaS companies tend to work in that space where it's the cleanest thing to do, and it's a traditional way to work with. The moment we come to internal data, you're automatically eliminating a lot of the regular SaaS companies that we fall under. And then you already come into the business analytics, or either big tech or business analytics, or the likes of Accenture and Deloitte, etc. So now if you take that particular space, like I spoke to you, big tech does not have a last mile solution. They will want people, implementers, to use their platforms to build something for them. So you take big tech out of the equation, you're definitely left with a combination of the likes of Accenture, but they also need to use OpenAI, or they have to use Gemini in combination and then build something for these companies. So the alternative for these companies is build it themselves or work with the likes of Accenture or Deloitte to build a model for themselves, which is at the very minimum $2 million or a year away. So in theory, it's mostly buy versus build, whether you can build it yourself or you want to buy something. And a lot of these companies are going to find it hard because AI talent is scarce, and companies that we work with don't have product teams inside. They have IT teams and they have business teams. So even if they have to build an AI architecture, or even if they have to build an intelligence layer, they wouldn't know how to program the UX because there are no product people inside. So I think we are in a bit of a sweet spot. I'm sure there are many like us who will eventually come up. But if you were to ask me, if you want to build an AI intelligence expertise layer for yourself, which can, as a company, as a CPG company or a retail company, that can be built across your company, that will upgrade your data to one layer more than just the raw data into insights and decisions, and then you can work much faster. That would be where we are.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, maybe to close down our discussion, I have two questions for you. One, which is, I guess, very basic, is how do you start an AI company. So, I mean, I don't know, tomorrow I have an idea, I take my shower, I have a eureka moment. I'm like, okay, I need to build that product and train my models, etc., for that specific application. I'm not a tech person. So, what do you need? I mean, you need to get some, scientists. How do you start creating a model? Are there any models out there off the shelf you can essentially buy and start training on your own? How does it work? So that's the first question. Sorry, that was the first question. And the second question is really, as a founder today, what is your wish list? So yeah, two questions. How do you start an AI company? Like very AI company for dummies. And what is your wish list today?
Okay, first question. Point number one is be stupid, stupidly irrational in starting an AI company today. But jokes aside, I would, I think it is actually the best time for a non-tech founder. As much as it can be, it's still not most ideal if you're not a tech person. You definitely need a tech founder for sure. But I do think that if you were to, I mean, let's look at it a little practically, right? The amount of investment that's gone in the infrastructure layer or the model, etc., is so high that as a startup today, unless you have an AI researcher from Stanford or from anywhere else, it's kind of hard to compete on building foundation models. So you can keep that aside. Application layer still is, there's a lot of people that you can there's a lot of work that you can do, especially if you know the business pain points really, really well. Because the one thing that somebody who's an AI researcher or somebody who has a highly qualified tech team cannot do is to replace that particular information or knowledge. So you really need to know the industry really, really well. You need to know that pain points really, really well. And then you can definitely start solving for those pain points and then figure out how to productize it. So I would
I
say it's
mean,
very hard.
the model itself, how do you get it? Where do you get it from?
We don't need to build a model. You're using foundational models. You just have to build. If you want to build agents, you can use any of the foundational models, ChatGPT or Gemini or Llama, whatever
Okay.
it is, and you can build on top of that. So we haven't built any foundational models ourselves, but we have built on top of that. But there is still some IP that you can build on top of that. Our expertise layer is our IP, and the fact that the expertise layer keeps getting better for that particular industry is our IP. So we can keep adding proprietary data, we can keep adding proprietary quote unquote expertise from different experts in the market to make that better and better. So you could do this for any version of any niche in the entire market. You could let's say if you are catering to uh, poultry farmers in the world, and if you want to build specifically AI that helps them procure it faster and do better supply chain, and if you know poultry farming really, really well, then you could build something really, really good for it.
I
So
happen to know quite well this space.
so let's go. Poultry LLMs for poultry farming should be the next one.
That's good. So that was first question. And the very last question is, what is your wish list today?
I think we've so far relied, we work with the likes of Unilever, LVMH, Colgate, Palmolive, some of the largest companies like Heineken, Hershey's, all of those companies, as well as large companies in India, Indonesia, and the Middle East. But most of it has been word of mouth. So we are now expanding to a better and a more scaled approach in terms of go to market. And I'm putting the go to market hat on for now. So the first thing that I've asked as a wish list from my product team is to give me a go to market product that is so easy that people, when I go to sell something, I can just use one single microsite for people to check what the product is and click 5 to 6 clicks for them to figure out what everything, and then they are onboarded, which is quite hard for any enterprise. But I've asked them that that's my wish list in any case. But more importantly, from a go-to-market perspective, we see that one of the big gaps in the go-to-market strategy is trust for large enterprises. So we are bridging that trust through what we have a partners program as well as an evangelist program. So an evangelist program is that if you're an independent consultant and you have high trust, you have high equity in the market, and you know specifically how to solve problems for these folks, but you don't have a product, and they want you to tell them what AI to use, and then they want you to suggest how to solve that with a product, that's where we can be of use in terms of a evangelist program or a partners program. So if you're an independent consultant, then we have an evangelist program for you. If you're a institutional consultant, then we have a partners program for you that we'd love to work with you.
So the wish list is this magic little product to showcase what you can do. More clients, more partners. Super.
Sounds
More
like everyone.
sales.
I wish you all the luck in the world. And I think that would be a clap for the end. Sandeep, many thanks for being with us on Aulium. It was absolutely amazing to have you. Marcus, it's always a pleasure. And I hope we will be the three together very soon again. So thank you very much.